HIKARU Nakamura sacrificed 2 pieces in the first 4 moves and still beats Grandmaster Dmitry Colors in a blitz game I want to show you today. Nakamura starts with e4, his opponent answers with e5, and after knight f3, knight c6 and bishop c4, we have a 2 knights defense, and after bishop c5, it's Italian Jacopiana game on the board. And here bishop takes f7, sacrificing the bishop. Now, don't try it at home. This is not a good move. But if you're Nakamura, if you're playing a blitz game and the result doesn't really matter in terms of the final standings and you wanna have fun, why not? King takes f7 and Nakamura sacrifices another piece. Knight takes e5 check. Again, this is not the way to play chess, but again, Nakamura is having fun. He wants maybe to prove that in a blitz game against a weaker opponent he can win even without 2 pieces after move 5. And let's see what happens. Knight takes e5, queen h5 check. Now if g6, then queen would take on e5, therefore king e6, protecting the knight on e5, everything is protected. Queen f5 check, and king d6, king in the middle of the board, and white definitely has an activity, but they're without 2 pieces in an absolutely lost position. But try to defend it for black. f4, hitting the knight on f6, and black decided to sacrifice that knight because if, let's say, knight would go to g6, Nakamura would check on d5 and take 1 piece away and keeping a very good position. Therefore, black decided to give 1 piece back, queen h4 check, g3 and queen f6. Pawn takes e5 check, queen takes e5. Obviously, if you are black, you would be absolutely delighted if Nakamura would take your queen and exchange right now the pieces, the queens, because in that case 1 extra piece would simply decide the game. Obviously, Nakamura doesn't... Oh wait! He does exchange the queens. Really interesting decision. After king takes e5, his position seems to be completely lost because he is without a piece. And Nakamura plays b4, sacrificing a pawn. Now you cannot take the pawn on b4 because bishop check on b2, and the skewer, after the king would move away, bishop would take the pawn on g7 and will capture the rook on ha. Therefore, Colors plays bishop d4, c3, attacking the bishop, bishop retreats to b6, d4, gaining the center and checking the king moves away, and bishop b2. Black's position is still totally winning, but they still have to be very careful how to proceed here. And again, I'm reminder, this is a blitz game, not so much time left for black, and they play a5, very logical move. They want to activate their rook on the a file. d5 check, king goes back to f7. Nakamura gets his rook into attack by checking the black king with the move rook f1 check. Now if black develops the knight on f6, then e5 and the knight would be captured because it's pinned. Therefore, king after check goes to g6 and Nakamura develops the knight on d2, knight goes to f6, knight f3, rook e8, hitting the pawn on e4. And now one point here, that if black took the pawn on e4 right away, then we have knight e5 check, king, let's say, go to h5 and rook f4, hitting the knight on e4 and threatening check on h4. And let's say knight f6, then we have rook h4 check, king g5, and knight f7, winning the rook. Therefore, taking the pawn on e4 immediately would have been a mistake. Rook e8, much better move, and e5. In this position, black knight is not under attack because the pawn is pinned. h6, preparing an escape square for the king. Long castle for white on move 21. Knight g4, attacking the pawn on e5. Rook e1, protecting that pawn. Exchange of the pawns on b4. And knight d3, forking the rook and the pawn on d5. Knight h4 check, king h7, and the rook infiltrates into black's position with rook f7. And here comes king g8, which is a big mistake. The best move for black in this position was knight c4. Now, if knight takes d5, then after e6, and let's say taking the pawn, rook g7, and white actually checkmates the black king with the move knight g6. Therefore, taking the pawn on d5 was not the best idea, because after e6, Nakamura would activate his bishop and will create checkmating chances. But king g8 wasn't the best idea either, because still e6. This bishop is a monster now. The rook is very active, threatening to take on g7, and that actually cannot be protected in this position. So after d takes e6, rook g7 check, king goes to f8, Nakamura plays knight g6, checkmate. So that's how Nakamura won a blitz game against a very strong 2600 rated Grandmaster Dmitry Kollars, by sacrificing 2 pieces in the opening 4 moves. But again, please don't do it in your games, or at least in your serious games. Maybe in blitz games, on a bullet chess game, that could fly, but in a real game, try to do this, as most of the time you would lose without 2 pieces sacrificed after 4 moves. But Nakamura took a chance and actually checkmated his opponent in this game.